Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Kristine Barnes, the Speaker of the Senate for the Society of Women Engineers. I am happy to be here today with four of our past and present SWE senators, and they have offered to share their experiences about what it's like to serve on the Senate, what the role of senator entails, and how their time in the Senate has helped them grow as leaders. So here with me today, I have Inga Urbina, Sreyoshi Bhaduri, Bianca McCartt, and Kaitlyn Bunker. Welcome, and thank you so much for being here to share your stories and experiences.
Thanks. Excited to be here.
Thank you.
All right, so let's get started. Let's set the stage and give an overview of the SWE Senate as a whole. So what is the SWE Senate? What is the senator's role within SWE? And how are they different from other SWE leadership roles? And Bianca, let's start with you.
So the Senate is really the advisory body for strategy for the society. And I actually like to think about it from a metaphorical perspective of the board of directors kind of operates like your flight crew in a plane. They have their hands on the controls, and the Senate is like your air traffic controllers. They're putting out there what are the things that are on the horizon to be aware of, to watch out for, the opportunities, the things that SWE needs to know and our SWE leadership needs to know in order to think about where are we going in the future and how are we serving the mission of the society. And so in Senate, you really get a chance to take a long view of what's going on around you, what's going on in the world, and how could this organization really shape the future of engineering careers for women at large globally, and look at some really big issues. So the role of a senator is pretty unique in that you have the opportunity to share both your own perspective and your own experiences while thinking about what is that larger impact, and gather information along with the support of a group that is also looking at these important topics for the society.
Well, thank you. And Inga, how have you seen that this is different from other SWE leadership roles you've had or other experiences you've had within SWE?
Well, for me, and I suppose for the rest also, is in other leadership roles, you tend to make things happen. And we're like, oh, okay, I need to do this, gonna report that. And here you have to stop yourself. No, we're not gonna make anything happen here. We have to think out there. And I think that's the fun part. You have to imagine, I think the other day we were doing exercise, SWE 2060. What is it like? It's far out. The shortest we've done is 5 years. So you really have to think out there, see the trends, guesswork, feeling a lot of studies and data. And that's not what happens with the other roles. At least I've seen, in the, so affiliate work is very much on the ground. And committees, they just, executing stuff and making things happen. So.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you. Kaitlyn or Sreyoshi, anything to add?
No, I love the metaphor that Bianca provided. I think that's exactly right. Like, you have to think about what's coming in the future and thinking about those 5, 10, 15, 60 years from now. Where do you want SWE to be? How do you want SWE to be inclusive for someone like you? And that's why I guess we try to bring in as many diverse voices as we can to the Senate, because as we're thinking about the future, we want to bring in thoughts about the futures for everyone, and not just like one generalized view of what the future looks like for a specific group. So definitely a lot of strategy, and it's very different from the more operational day-to-day, like let's get this done in the now kind of a mindset that most leadership teams have within SWE and other professional organizations. Even within our work, I feel like those leadership roles are very operational specific, and SWE Senate is more strategic, long-term. It's very interesting and very unique as a body, I think.
Thank you.
Yes. I would agree. I was just going to agree with what everyone has said and how they've described the strategic view. A piece that I really enjoyed in the role of senator is how this view is both external and internal to SWE. And so we're looking at what are the trends in the world that are relevant in the field of engineering, relevant to women, and what do those mean for SWE? And then internally, what does SWE need to be thinking about and doing and shaping as we think about how to support our members? Again, in the very long term, we're looking very far ahead in the Senate.
I thought of one other thing to add that is a little bit unique around the Senate, which is that you have 21 members who are all essentially equal in the same role. And I think that is a little bit unusual because we're all leaders and we're all contributing to this global vision. And you have these 3-year alternating terms where you have 7 new folks coming in every year. So it's constantly bringing in these fresh perspectives and hearing from all of these different voices around the world. So that is something that I think is different from most SWE groups.
Oh, absolutely, Bianca. Thank you for sharing that. So we'll go on to our next question about your journey to becoming a SWE senator. So Kaitlyn, I'd like to start with you on this one. Let's talk about your journey to becoming a SWE senator.
Sure. So I'd been a SWE member for many years and had different volunteer roles and leadership roles. I had done a lot with my local section. I was section president there and done some other work locally. I had been on some committees, the nominating committee for SWE. I don't think there's one path or one thing that's required necessarily to be a good senator. I had sort of this experience from throughout SWE and was looking for the next right opportunity. Started hearing about the Senate and this long-term strategic work that we've been describing. And I had just moved into a new role at work as well, where I had more responsibility around strategy, setting the strategy for my team and my program. So it seemed like a good fit and a good opportunity to move into the senator role in SWE and be able to build and practice strategic thinking, strategic planning skills in SWE and at work and translate those skills back and forth.
Oh, thank you. Inga, how about you? Why did you become a senator?
That was a typical, I suppose. I got this email from somebody that was called Heather Doty, and I said, I don't know her. So I ignored the email for about 2 weeks. And I thought, well, it's kind of rude to ignore people, even if I don't know them. So when I read the email again, and the email said, somebody said that you would do a good senator. If you want, I'd like to introduce you to somebody who's in the Senate. And then I read president of SWE. I was like, oh, okay. So I wrote back and said, sure. And she introduced me to Lisa Rimpf, who at the time, I think it was third-year senator, who then went on to be the secretary of the Senate. And at the time, Lisa was living in Germany. So it was a good thing, well, for me, that she was in my time zone, so we could connect, and we made these connections, and she pretty much held my hand to, how do you apply? And I was like, are you sure you need me there? You have like 40,000 members. I'm sure that somebody else that has some more idea about SWE than me, because I recognize there's all this tradition in the US. People go from college or from even before that. And, I've only been like 3 or 4 years as an ambassador locally. And we started discussing, being an affiliate, but nothing really. And she really held my hand because I didn't understand anything. I don't think there were videos about like this ones that we're doing now. And it's pretty confusing if you don't know anything about SWE, how to do it. But I made it through the process, and then the vetting was also interested because I was like, I don't have the typical path, graduating. So I'm more in the technology domain now. Whereas if I started in, I did study finance at university. But we're all women in technology and engineering. And I am an engineer in the end. She said, you're an engineer. You have to understand that. I fix everything at home. I fix, I do my programming. Everything that you have the engineer mind. You just, in Venezuela at that time, nobody said that I could do that. Anyway, and I was surprised that I got elected. I got elected to finish somebody's term, which was 1 year only. So after 1 year, I was like, about one more. So I had to rerun. But yeah, and here I am, my second term. So that's how I got there.
Oh, thanks, Inga. How about you, Sreyoshi?
I mean, just listening to Kaitlyn and Inga's journeys, I think it kind of reinforces that there's like no one path to Senate, and there's no like right senator or like definition of who makes a good senator. I think the nominating committee does a great job, like just bringing in different backgrounds and, making sure that the team that they're putting forward just works together in terms of bringing in different skills, lived experiences, competencies. And my experience was also very similar to Inga's in the sense that I was attending one of the SWE conferences, and someone reached out to me and said, hey, the nominations for Senate leadership is open. And I'd never really served at the society level. And I'd only served, I think for about 10 years, I'd served at my collegiate section and then at different professional sections. And I hadn't really considered society level leadership. I didn't know that it was for someone like me. I thought you had to be much more accomplished within SWE and within SWE roles to actually take on those leadership positions. And I was like, should I even apply? Am I good enough for this? And I spoke to different people and they said, yeah, there's no harm in applying. Just do it because, you do this for your work. You may be a good fit for the role. And I feel like just having those conversations is a great start to anyone who's even thinking about any kind of leadership role, like whether it's on the Senate or any other SWE leadership role, like just having those conversations. When I was part of the professional sections, I used to think that the board of directors or the senators are, you don't reach out to them, you don't email them, it's scary. But I would love if folks reached out to me, and I've had folks reach out to me in the past years that I've served. And they've had similar questions. They've been like, oh, I'm not based in the US. And I give an example of people like Inga. And I say, look at her. She's been on the Senate. She's a great contributor. And she doesn't live in the US, and you don't have to either. And I think just having those conversations was very helpful for me to A, apply, and then B, learn about what the different, society level bodies or committees they really work on. So I think just having those conversations is a big deal for me.
Oh, thanks, Sreyoshi. Bianca, how about your journey?
So I've been in SWE since I was a student, so it's over 20 years now. I was a very active student member. I was on my section's leadership board. I was on the editorial board for the magazine. And then when I became a professional, I joined the leadership for my local South Ohio SWE section. But then I think I sort of stepped away a little bit and started to focus more on how my company interacts with SWE and wasn't as involved in SWE leadership itself directly for several years. But I was going to conferences, and at the SWE 17 conference, I went and discovered the affinity groups, which have been a really wonderful pathway back into SWE for me. So I got very involved in the Latinos affinity group. And through that, we started having information sessions for those who are in the affinity group about how to get more involved in SWE leadership. So I was hosting sessions that were really about, what are the opportunities to stay involved in SWE and continue your professional development and contribute to the society's mission. And so when my term ended as the co-lead for the Latinos affinity group, I put in for the Senate and just felt like it was kind of a natural progression at that point. And I really had this ambition to help affinity groups become more visible in SWE, which I think is starting to happen that is a little more of an informal pathway, I think, than a lot of people take. But there's really something out there for everybody. And I think that it was a great way for me to get exposure to that society level leadership to begin with.
Oh, thank you, Bianca. Your stories are also different. I think it just highlights how there is no one path to SWE leadership, and you can take your own journey. So let's paint a picture for people who might be thinking about joining the Senate on what the role entails. So, Sreyoshi, could you describe a typical month, if there is one, and or some examples of what you've worked on and what your time on the Senate has looked like?
I don't think there's a typical month. I don't know if others agree or disagree. I think every year, so I'm a third year Senate, entering my third year now. And so every year for me on the Senate has been its own kind of, interesting and a very different experience. So the first year was mostly about ramping up learning, networking, getting to know how we operate, and then also kind of training myself to think strategically. I mean, I'm going to use an algorithmic metaphor in that a lot of times when we are designing any system or code, writing any piece of code, we may think about optimizing it, or we may think about how is this going to be best optimized for the user. In the Senate, you have to step back and think about just go wild with your ideas and be in that research mode where, you think about all of the possible ideas that are there and then leave the implementation and the optimization and the actual workings to the other experts. You think big. And I think a lot of year one was just pushing ourselves to think big, think about what we see around us, what are the research trends. We were still really reeling from the pandemic. And so thinking about, how that affects all of this, how that affects us as a professional organization, how that affects us as individuals, how that affects us as volunteers. So all of those dynamics was something that we focused on in year one. And there was obviously each month was its own kind of ramping up to that. Year two was more about taking on leadership for me within the Senate. And so I was co-lead for one of the sub-teams with Erica. And so we had a lot of conversations on a given topic and really making sure that everyone on the sub-team got an opportunity to communicate ideas and actually feel heard and feel included in the discussion, and not just included, but like they actually contributed to that final deliverable that we worked on. So last year was more about taking on that leadership and beginning to mentor the newer senators, talking to them about their experiences, talking externally about what it means to be a senator. And then year three, which is the year that this year going forward, I think is going to be much more of doing those mentorship and leadership kind of roles, and still thinking strategically, but also thinking about passing it on to the newer senators and having them take on those ideas in the future years. So no typical month as such, but I think year-wise, it looks very similar for senators. And obviously, I do want to bring up that life happens, and we've had each of us have had personal stuff come up. And I think this is a good platform to talk about how last year, when I was on the sub-team and both of us leads had something going on personally, and the whole sub-team stepped up. So the best part of SWE, I think, is that sense of, we got you and we got your back. That really helps build community and build friendships that are lifelong. Because I did not feel for a moment that, I was, abandoning ship, or I was not doing my responsibilities, because there was someone who got my back. And as soon as I was back, we could have those conversations and we could proceed as a team. So I think as much as there is ongoing commitment and the commitment does get a lot depending on what time of the year it is and, what deliverables you may have, it's also very flexible, and you are allowed to have your own life, and you're allowed to take a step back when your family needs it. So I think that's the best part about just serving on the Senate, at least for me.
Oh, thanks for sharing, Sreyoshi. Kaitlyn, would you like to add anything about what your time on the Senate looked like?
Sure. Well, I loved everything that Sreyoshi just talked through. It sounds very similar to my experience. The fact that we all have work and lives and a lot going on outside of SWE. I personally had a baby. I had 2 babies actually during my time on the Senate. But the second one was born in February, 10 days before our winter Senate meeting. And same as Sreyoshi's experience, our sub-team was excellent, stepped up, was ready to report out at that meeting. Since I was busy doing other things. So definitely the support system, I've had a similar experience. And I would agree, no typical month, things sort of flow during different years. But if we had to say what is maybe a typical month, typically the Senate has 1 call per month for the whole Senate, which would be the senators, the 21 senators that Bianca mentioned, as well as the board of directors and the Senate leadership all together forms the Senate. So we all would meet once per month, typically to touch base, share updates, have broader strategic discussions together. And then the sub-teams that we mentioned that are each focused on one strategic topic, typically for 1 fiscal year, they can work in different ways. The teams sort of figure out what works for them. Typically, the ones I participated on, we would have a call every other week. So we were interacting more frequently with this smaller group of maybe 5, 6, 7 senators and digging into our specific topic, having really good discussions. In between, we would go out and maybe do a little bit of research. So there was a little work in between, but a lot of the work of the Senate was in discussions, in something like bi-weekly calls with our sub-team and then monthly calls with the full group of the Senate.
Oh, excellent. Thanks, Kaitlyn. Bianca, Inga, anything to add to that?
So I'll just talk a little bit about some of the initiatives that we worked on. So my first year on the Senate, I actually ended up volunteering to lead an initiative, or to be the sub-team co-lead. And that was the Racial Inclusivity for Society Equity Initiative. So that was really looking at, this was 2020. So we were just looking at what can the society do in order to ensure that we truly are an inclusive place for everyone from every background, in order to set that mission of how we make ourselves aware of the things that are happening that maybe lead to people feeling like they aren't part of the society, and understand how we can evolve in order to make it so that everyone who shows up feels like they can find their place. So that was a really important effort, I felt, and learned a lot through that, both about what the experience of people is today and what we could really do in order to make substantial changes. And it was also a big learning for me about how SWE works globally as a whole. It's a very, very large organization. And a lot of times people don't realize, because they think of it from, just where they were at with their section or the things that they've specifically been involved in. But there's all of these committees and the affinity groups, as mentioned before, and other bodies like the Board of Trustees and scholarships and awards and all of these elements. And so one of the things that was cool about RISE was that we took that very holistic look at all of these aspects within SWE. So that was a lot of fun. And then the following year, I was on the annual strategic planning sub-team. So that was really more looking at what is our strategic goals and mission, and how do we update our wording in order to continue to stay relevant and evolve. So that was really interesting because we worked with a consulting firm that specializes in these things. and very educational as well.
Thanks, Bianca.
I just wanted to say for what Kaitlyn shared, yes, she was our sub-team lead, and to my surprise, she did turn up with the baby just after having the baby. I was like, these women are amazing. She was just there. It's like, I don't know if I could do that. But just to say, you know, it's amazing how that support system in there. She was so comfortable that, you know, she was there with the baby. We were having discussions. She was still chiming in. It was great. And this is how the sub-team looks like. I was really excited the first year was like 3 months. So I was trying to ramp up what to do. Whatever Sreyoshi took a year, I had to kindly go there quickly. But then the following year was a strategic year. So I was like, yes, I get to have a say in the strategy, which, you know, so that's fantastic. And then I thought I was really going to go in I think global leadership, or, you know, being global. But I was bummed at the beginning. I was putting growth and excellence. And in the end, I think that's exactly where I needed to be, because, you know, the growing globally, it was already on the place. And it was, for me, as somebody coming from a non-traditional path, growth and excellence made me define how we want to be open to the non-traditional path to engineering. And I was able to shape that. So I was really excited about that. And also during that term, I kept talking about innovation and sustainability. And I thought I'd been totally ignored, but it wasn't. It was put into our last year work. And we brought about everything that, you know, I wanted to raise, especially coming from Europe, where sustainability is the big thing. It's like happening. I was like, no, we have to bring the society to this particular level of understanding of what happened in the rest of the world. And we got there. We got great work, and we already started with great work as well this year. So it's all exciting if you really want to do things and impact how the future is going to look like.
Oh, thank you all for sharing. Go ahead.
I can add one more thing to build on Inga's comment. I think we've done a great job thinking about how the Senate operates and building inclusive practices into that and continuing to improve. And so a lot of our work is done in a hybrid format. There are some in-person meetings that happen, but even for folks who can't attend those, we've really been thoughtful about how to make sure everyone can participate. So when I did have a new baby, I was able to join over Zoom, right, and still be able to hear and listen to what's been going on. And so I've appreciated the thoughtfulness. Some of that came from the pandemic, of course, and the world having to adjust, but specifically in SWE and the Senate, I think we've really worked on how do we make sure we're operating in a way that everybody can participate and give their contributions no matter where they are.
Yeah, and just a quick thought about that. Now, you know, I don't have regular monthly meetings, because for me, the monthly meetings are between 2 or 3 in the morning when they're scheduled in the nighttime in the US, but I'm able to see the recording. So the fact that there's shift between daytime and nighttime, I can participate at least once every 2 months in the calls, because so I like that practice.
Thank you all. So let's get down to some of the nitty-gritty. What's the time commitment if people are looking to be on the Senate? Just give us a ballpark average per month.
I suppose it depends if you're on the leadership of one of the subcommittees towards, because you know, I consider myself the lazy one. Because I see the leads, and oh my God, they work so hard and they have everything so prepared. Oh, they're super women, and I still need to learn that one. But they seem to have everything in place. Everything is kind of working there, and I think their time commitment. So I think we have a few leads here. For my small commitment part is the monthly plus any time schedule for the sub team that your leads decide, or the whole team decides what to do.
You know where leads
yeah. So I think when I was working on Rise, it was probably like 3 hours a week, something like that, including working with the whole Senate meetings as well as my Rise team, sub-team leader commitments on average.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'd agree. Mine was also around 2 to 3 hours. And towards the end, when we're report writing and putting all the notes together, it kind of ramps up and becomes a little more. But I think it was about 2 to 3 weekends that we kind of worked on our report. But other than that, I would agree it's around 2 to 3 hours per week, including all of the calls that we have as co-leads with our sub-teams and then the Senate itself. So, yeah. That's
right. Okay. Kaitlyn, you agree?
I do. And then, like we've been saying, it ebbs and flows. Maybe different parts of the year are a little bit lighter and some are heavier. And there's some flexibility here for what works for you, and being able to lean in and then just participate in the core work at other times as you need to. But I would agree with this average. We're settling on 2 to 3 hours per week.
Sounds good. Thank you. So let's talk about how the Senate has helped you personally grow as leaders. So Inga, how have you helped it in your professional career?
So although the strategic view for me was always kind of there, where, thinking, can anyone see it? Because, people are very much focused here. But I quite like the learning about the Robert Rule of Order, because it gives context to that discussion. And, I talk a lot and might digress. And, it helps you, okay, we're here for an hour. These are the points, stick to the points. And then you have to ask for permission to talk. And those are when you have the formal meetings, when we have to approve something, agree on something, because everything needs to be written down, voted upon, or posted, whatever. There is some logic to that, because that's the way it is done. But it also tells you how to come to a formal agreement with a group of other leaders. And so I suppose when they came to do the Constitution or the Liberation, or you do a peace agreement, this is the kind of how you need to handle negotiations for everyone to agree. Now, to get there, then there's the other part. How do you interact with, because sometimes it might at work or maybe with your friends, you have this discussion, and, depending on what kind of personality you want to, your personality comes over. And I think Erica mentioned this, you have to give space or take space. You have to, depending on your personality, let the others talk, or, take more when you don't normally talk. And that, give space, take space, because everyone that so far I've met in the Senate, all of the years I've been there, two and a half, everyone has great ideas, super interesting points of view, different career paths. So the active listening for me has come to its highest. And, I think that the longer I'm in the Senate, the quieter I get, because a lot more, by now I'm bored of myself, and I want to hear everybody and take in everything that they're saying and learn so much. And then with all those ideas, including mine at some point, we just make something bigger and better. So the level of collaboration and professionalism there, it's like, oh my God, if I could just take this to my work was like this every day, it would be like super efficient. But yeah, to me, I can see how you can grow as a leader, because then it's easy to help the others grow, like lifting each other each time we go. So I think it's just like, whether I go to any leadership, either at work or elsewhere, I think already I feel fulfilled, as my Inga leadership model is it's fine there.
Thanks, Inga. Bianca, how has the Senate helped you grow?
So one of the things that I think was really important for me was thinking about the value of the dissenting voice. We had a lot of topics in the Senate where we were really having debates about what direction we want to go next, what's important, what's critical, and had to make some key decisions. And at my first year in the Senate, we had this discussion around the constitutional law approach of our Supreme Court, and what was the importance of bringing forward those dissenting opinions. And I think that really shaped for me the key to not necessarily just gloss over like, oh, this something seems like a good idea. I see a lot of pros to it. Let's just go forward with it. You really have to step back and take a look at the cons from many different perspectives. Not just what's obvious, not just what's easy, but all of the different ways that can have an impact. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be a bad idea and you're going to stop and do it, but just really consider what are the things that we need to think about as potential risks and ways to mitigate those risks and ways to ensure that we have heard all of the cons and all of the dissenting opinions. And sometimes there's a struggle with that. It doesn't feel comfortable most of the time when people feel really strongly about these things. But I do think that it's worthwhile and it's fruitful. And so now I think it has trained me, being in these discussions for the past 3 years, to be more proactive in seeking that out, to say, if I don't know what those are, then I don't have a full and realistic picture of the decision that we're trying to make. So it's really important to ensure that we've really explored that.
Thanks, Bianca. Kaitlyn, how have you grown?
Sure. So I mentioned part of why I was interested in being a senator, being on the Senate, is to align with my role at work. I'm a director of a program within a nonprofit. And so in that role, I do this strategic thinking as well, and this broader, what are the trends that we need to be aware of? How do we set our strategy and our direction for our work? So definitely being on the Senate allowed me to do that in 2 different places, that long-term view, and build and practice and transfer skills and be stronger in both. I think the other piece that was useful to grow with and is something I'm still working on now is sort of the ability to zoom back and forth from different ways of working. So we've talked about how the Senate's very strategic, very long ahead focused, which is true. There are also some times where we do need to sort of zoom way back in to something more detailed. An example might be, let's look at our procedures document and make sure we're following that, or do we need to make updates to that? It's an important, way to make sure we're operating in the right way. But that's very different than a long-term strategic discussion, right? So sort of zooming back and forth and using maybe different parts of our brain. I have to do that at work as well. There are times where I need to go, okay, into the detail, something very tactical, and then zoom back to this more strategic look. So being able to practice that, mostly very strategic long-term, but shifting my mindset at different times has been really valuable as a senator and as part of the Senate.
Awesome. Thanks, Kaitlyn. Sreyoshi.
I think +1 to all the skills that were brought up. I absolutely agree, like the zooming back and forth, as well as what Inga brought up about active listening. I think doing all of these skills and practicing them as part of the Senate really helps develop them. I think in addition to all of these, personally for myself, I've really found just being more metacognitive or reflective about my actions have been really helpful. And so, and I think the fact that last year I co-led the Future Leadership Experiences sub-team, where we talked a lot about leadership competencies, and we talked about the leadership competency model that's developed and part of the SWE Learning Center. I think that's a really good resource to think about how one has, developed or grown in a particular skill or a series of skills. And similar to Kaitlyn, I think I also think a lot about how I develop certain skills and then take them back to work. And so thinking about mapping whatever I've learned on the Senate to my day job, essentially, and thinking about communication, business acumen, and all of those larger, categories or subsets of skills has been helpful for me. And I think just being on the Senate, working with these different kinds of voices, the dissenting voices, learning how to be, active listeners, I think also helps develop those other skills, because no skill exists in isolation. So as you become an active listener, you also are able to effectively manage and supervise or mentor So they kind of play into each other. So I think reflecting on those on a regular basis has been really helpful as an exercise for me in both professional but also on a personal capacity.
Oh, thank you, Sreyoshi. So we're on our last question, and I want you each to tell me what you're most proud of in your work as a senator. So Bianca, we'll start with you.
I was thinking about this. There are many things I think that I can be proud of, but in one particular, I created a document that was kind of like my world map of SWE, and I reference it all the time of all of these different pieces that all fit together to form SWE, and I find that to be a really useful thing, both for myself and for helping others to understand what SWE truly is and the reach that we have. And so I think that is certainly something that I'm very proud of.
Yes, I know that map very well. Kaitlyn.
I'd agree with Bianca. There's a lot to be proud of. I would say it's clear that the work that the Senate does across various strategic initiatives is very valued and SWE. What was exciting also was seeing some of that in writing. So some of the work that I did contributing to SWE's strategic plan that's written down, that lasts for 5 years. And then in other years, the work that our sub-teams were doing being translated into parts of the operational plan that forms the work that SWE is doing, in a particular year. So seeing some of our work be written and be part of, what's there, what SWE is doing is something I'm proud of.
Thank you, Kaitlyn. Inga?
There is our pillar number 4, growth and excellence. I'm super proud of that one. And also the innovation and sustainability that we did, the work that we did last year. I think it will set the future for what's to come. I also realize, obviously, coming from, water is transparent, but when they keep saying, the outside look from the US look, and just this week when we met in person, it was a funny discussion where what we're gonna eat, and we had different restaurants, and somebody asked, have you considered black restaurant cuisine or like black cuisine? And I was thinking, well, the Cuban is black, they're all black, and they would say it's not the same. I said, but what color do you black? What do you mean it's not the same? And I didn't quite understand, so we started this discussion on the side about the hues of black, or what is it, because I didn't quite understand. I think we were talking colors, but then they realized that we were not talking the same thing. It was very interesting to the something that you might consider, well, this is so clear. Well, no, depends where you come from. Different things mean different stuff. So I think that outside of the US perspective is my constant contribution.
Oh, it certainly is, Inga. Thank you. Sreyoshi.
I'd have to agree that seeing things that we have conversed, debated upon, and spent hours brainstorming actually make it as part of strategic or operational plans or operational goals. I think that's the most, I think that makes me feel the most proud, seeing, because that it can just be a bullet point on a slide and could be just a sub-goal of a sub-goal. But the amount of conversations and debating and brainstorming and hours that you've spent really thinking about it and informing some of that, some of the board on that, making it as part of a goal. I think that definitely feels like an accomplishment. And it can feel slow sometimes because it happens after the whole year, and sometimes you may not see it immediately. So it takes a lot of patience and back and forth and communication with the board, with those external to the Senate, to kind of explain why some of the conversations were had, what are some of the rationale behind the conversations that were had, and why we are proposing a strategic direction. But to actually see them adopted, I think definitely feels like a highlight of being part of the Senate.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you, Sreyoshi. Well, that wraps up all of our questions today. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences on the SWE Senate and talking with us today. I hope you all had a great time, and I enjoyed hearing all your stories.
I learned something new about everyone, so this was great.
Yeah. Same.
Thank you all.
In every interaction, we learn about everyone. I haven't seen that map, Bianca. You're gonna have to show me.
Thanks. So, for anyone who is listening who is curious about the nomination process, please watch your email and SWE social media, as the call for nominations should go out at the end of August. And if you have further questions about serving as a senator, feel free to reach out to me at senate-speaker@SWE.org, or check out the Senate page on SWE.org under About and Governance. And you can also read our interviews with all of these wonderful senators on the SWE Altogether blog, and the link to that blog post can be found in the caption of this video. I'm Kristine Barnes, and from all of us at SWE, thank you for listening.